exchange 40 marks and only 40 marks. All other old money was worthless. The Soviets retaliated by issuing their own new currency, which they insisted would include all of Berlin.
Currency and political power were synonymous at that time. And therefore it was so important that the Western currency, the D-Mark, had to be introduced into West Berlin and not the Eastern German currency.
General Clay and the Western Allies were persuaded by Ernst Reuter to issue the new Deutschmark in West Berlin. The new Deutschmark, stamped with a B for Berlin, was introduced in the western sectors on June the 23rd. There were now two currencies in the city. Berliners discovered that the Western D-Marks were worth more.
Many people from the West frequently traveled to the East and of course bought up what they could. East marks and West marks, if you can call them that, were usually 1 to 7 or 1 to 5. That is, we got 7 or 5 East German marks for 1 West mark. And as we found out later, it was a sellout, at least around Berlin.
The introduction of the new Western currency in Berlin infuriated the Soviets, who debated what to do next.
Sokolovsky picked up the special phone and rang Molotov. He said, "We're discussing these matters. What shall we do?" We all understood the seriousness of the situation. Molotov replied, "You're not planning to bring tanks out into the streets, are you?" Sokolovsky said, "No, not in the streets, but I'll move them closer to Berlin." "No, don't do that," Molotov said. "Let's wait a bit. If you bring in the tanks, you'll be accused of planning to seize the whole of Berlin, and they will bring out their tanks. It's better to resolve this issue by using diplomatic language."
The Soviets blocked all major road, rail and canal links between West Berlin and Western Germany. They made no concerted effort to seal every route, but delivery of the 12,000 tons of food and coal normally supplied by the West to Berlin every day was now impossible. The Soviets cut electricity supplies to factories and offices. West Berliners could do little. Their only large power station had been dismantled for reparations by the Soviets in 1945. The Western Allies imposed a counter-blockade on the Soviet zone. Workers throughout the whole of Berlin faced unemployment and hardship.
First of all, it was a terrible shock. Wherever you went, everyone asked, "Oh my God, what will happen to us now?"
Stalin's purpose was clear: to force the Western Allies to change their policies or quit Berlin. In 1945, the Western Allies had made a written agreement with the Soviets. Planes could fly along 3 air corridors 20 miles wide to 2 Berlin airfields, Tempelhof and Gatow. Seaplanes could also set down on Lake Havel. The British responded to the challenge. They planned an airlift. Foreign Secretary Bevin put his weight behind the idea.
The physical suffering of 2.5 million people in Berlin to try and influence the Allies, the Western powers, in their treatment of the Germans, and to try to force us out is one which we are unable to accept.
General Clay, the American commander, didn't believe an airlift would work. He had wanted to test Soviet resolve by running an armed convoy through the blockade. Reluctantly, he agreed to pursue the airlift idea with Ernst Reuter.
Clay had said that this would mean extreme hardship and how little we could bring in at first. And he asked Reuter point blank, do you think the Berliners will be able to take it? Reuter quietly replied, you take care of the airlift, I'll take care of the Berliners. And Clay said that was good enough.
He called up General LeMay and said, General, we're going to haul coal into Berlin. Coal? General LeMay said. He said, yeah, we're going to keep this city alive.
The Berlin airlift began at the end of June. The Americans called it Operation Victuals. The British, Plain Fare. The airlift had to deliver 2,000 tons of supplies a day. Without it, West Berliners couldn't survive. They had coal for only 45 days and food for only 36.
The airlift began, which was welcomed with incredible enthusiasm. People had such confidence in it. It was really remarkable. People thought, why shouldn't it work? They dropped so many bombs on Berlin. They should be able to drop potatoes.
Bomben hier abgeworfen, da werden sie doch auch Kartoffeln abwerfen können.
Thousands of Berliners found jobs and one hot meal a day working for the airlift.
We were divided into work gangs, supervised by an American overseer. Each gang was ordered one by one to the planes as they came in. Go to the next plane, hieß es dann.
Each of the larger planes carried 9 tons.
We could unload each plane in roughly 7 minutes. That was 9 short tons of coal.
The British hired civilian operators.
There weren't many people in England that had any aeroplanes, but I was very lucky at the time, inasmuch that I actually owned 12 converted Halifax bombers. The government came along and said, look, can we do something with these aeroplanes? And I said, of course. But remember, we all thought that the Berlin airlift was only going to last 2 or 3 weeks, or there would have been a war.
America now raised the stakes by sending B-29 bombers, capable of carrying atom bombs, to Britain. The move was highly publicized.
These are the men whose nerve-wracking job it may be to fight their way through weather and red obstruction. So grave is the crisis that General Clay is recalled to Washington to report on the situation. He is greeted by Secretary of the Army Royal and then is welcomed by Chief of Staff Omar Bradley. On his shoulders may rest the responsibility for peace or war, and the Commander-in-Chief at the White House awaits his appraisal of the most explosive situation yet in the struggle between East and West.
Clay argued once again that he be allowed to confront the Soviets with an armed convoy.
Now, if the Soviets stepped aside and the convoy went through, then peace would continue. If they chose not to let the convoy through, then it meant war. It was just that simple. And last thing in the world President Truman wanted to do was see our country get into another great war. We just come out of one.
So, no armed convoy, but more planes for the airlift.
Since I have been in Washington, I have been assured of an additional supply of C-54s, which carry 10 tons, to replace the C-47s. And this will enable us to build our airlift up to 4,500 tons a day. This tonnage will enable us to maintain Berlin indefinitely while we try to find a peaceful solution to the Berlin problem.
In August, Stalin visited an air show near Moscow. He was confident that the Soviet blockade of Berlin's western sectors would be enough to force the Allies back to the negotiation table. But time wasn't necessarily on his side. The West's counter-blockade of coal, steel, and machine tools was beginning to bite. When Western diplomats asked for talks, he agreed.
Stalin
was very calm. He smoked. He didn't walk about like he usually did. Normally, he would pace around like a